Okay, this will be part 6 of this current reading of a book by Prince Felix Yusupov. And the full title, again, is Rasputin, His Malignant Influence, and His Assassination. So there are 5 other parts, so you can check those out. You can find them also on my, it's under William Ramsey Reads History, so you can listen to it there. And I have I have about 40 other episodes as well there. So you can check that out. Also on my regular podcast as well, which is William Ramsey Investigates, which I have this posted. And I've gotten great response. Most of the people find it very interesting. Like I said, I think in the first episode, this was kind of lost to history, not seen, not as important, and overlooked. But it has the ring of truth in a first person account. So here we go. So I'm back to page 227, chapter 20, Disappointment. On the evening of December 21st, we were astonished by the sudden appearance of soldiers at the Sergei Palace. We learned that they were a guard sent by the military authorities by order of the president of the Council of Ministers, who had been informed that Rasputin's adherents were preparing an attempt on our lives. At almost the same moment, another guard of a totally different kind sought admission. An agent of the secret police presented himself to General Lai Ming, alleging that he had been sent by Protopopov, Minister of the Interior. He declared that Protopopov had received information that the life of the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich was threatened, and had instructed him with the men under his command to guard the palace. The Grand Duke, on hearing of this, said that he had no need of any Protopopov guards, and asked General Lai Ming to insist on their producing papers in proof of their assertion. They had no documents of any kind and were immediately turned away from the palace. This, however, did not prevent them from keeping a watch on us from without, and from noting everyone who entered and left the building. Not content with their observations from outside, Rasputin's adherents made fresh attempts to gain access to us. On the second floor of the palace, which communicated with the lower floor by a circular staircase, the Anglo-Russian hospital was housed. Most suspicious individuals began to appear there, under pretext of visiting the wounded. Lady Sybil Gray, who was in charge of the hospital, advised us to close the staircase entrance and to place a sentry at that point. We acted on her suggestion. We seemed to be living in a beleaguered fortress. We could only follow events from a distance. We read the papers and listened to the accounts and conversations of our visitors. Each proffered his own opinion of what was happening. We encountered almost invariably a fear of any bold initiative, a passive awaiting of what the morrow could bring. Those who were in a position to act were too timorous to come out into the open. They seemed to be counting on some chance intervention which should decide the destiny of Russia. Even those who served their country and emperor in the name of duty envisaged that duty only in the narrow frame of the routine of a ministry or government department. In spite of their assiduity in the performance of their official tasks, they lacked the breadth of view which would have enabled them to realize the supreme importance of the moment. They did not venture to overstep the recognized limits of their authority. Devotion to the emperor, as felt by the most sincere among them, meant little more than a desire to please him, blind obedience tempered with the fear of compromising themselves by association with anything that savored of opposition. It is a characteristic fact that the handful of men who were in positions of influence in the government, independently of Rasputin's aid, and had nothing whatever in common with him, were afraid to visit us at the Sergei Palace. Yet it was only by the combined action of all who, by their parentage or position, could influence the emperor that successful results could be attained. If the emperor, on learning of the death of the Starets, traveled from GHQ in a cheerful frame of mind, it necessarily follows that he realized Rasputin's harmful influence in Russia. But he was unable to maintain this attitude after he had regained the atmosphere of Tsarskoye Selo, where feelings ran so high against us that we were threatened with the severest form of punishment, as was reported to us by so many of our friends. In such circumstances, what could be effected by people who singly expressed their opinions to the emperor and were then content to stand aside, conscious of having done their duty. Firmly convinced of the futility of struggling against fate, and Emperor Nicholas II, at the end of his reign, was weighed down not only by disturbances and failures of a political nature, but by all those morbid influences which surrounded him and stifled in him every possibility of active resistance. To awaken his own initiative and encourage his independence, the influence of his immediate surroundings would have had to be directly opposed by some very powerful and solidly organized force. If he had seen the majority of the imperial family and all honest men holding high office in the state were harmoniously united in striving to save the throne and Russia, it, it may well be that he would not only have responded to their exhortations, but would have been grateful to them for their moral support and for having freed him from the chains which had bound him. But from what elements could this solidly organized force be drawn? Where could people be found who were ready to sacrifice their own interests? Long years of Rasputin's influence with its surreptitious intrigues had contaminated those who stood high in the government service and fostered a widespread distrust, and had tainted even the best and most honorable with skepticism and suspicion. Some recoiled before serious decisions. Others no longer believed in anything, while others, again, simply did not bother their heads. After bidding our visitors farewell, the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovitch and I would remain alone, reviewing all that we had heard during the day, conversations, rumors, and facts, and we would exchange our impressions. Our deductions were far from encouraging. One by one, our bright hopes were extinguished. Those hopes which had been our inspiration in putting an end to Rasputin and had supported us through the nightmare of that unforgettable night of December 16th. As if I were reading a book, I turned over page after page of all that had passed. My acquaintance with Rasputin, the gradual growth of my resolve to destroy him, the appalling deception to which I had been obliged to resort, and the immense efforts it had cost me to preserve the role which I had assumed. With what youthful fervor we had believed that with one blow we could triumph over evil. To us it had seemed that Rasputin was merely a cancerous growth, and that with its removal the Russian monarchy would be restored to health. We would not admit that this cancer had become so deeply rooted that its work of destruction would baffle even the most radical measures. It would have been still more depressing to realize then that Rasputin's appearance on the scene was not merely an unfortunate chance, but that it was inexplicably connected with some hidden process of disintegration which had already affected part of the Russian state organism. Those days of arrest in the Sergei Palace taught us how difficult it was to change the course of history, even when inspired by the most sincere intentions, when ready for any sacrifice. But we still hoped for better things right up to the very last. And the whole country hoped for and believed in this improvement. A huge wave of patriotism had swept over Russia. Enthusiasm was especially marked in both the capitals. Every newspaper was full of eulogistic articles. The recent event was interpreted as heralding the extinction of an evil power which had brought Russia to the verge of ruin. Expression was given to the most sanguine hopes for the future, and on this occasion the voice of the press seemed to be a genuine reflection of the thoughts and feelings of the whole country. But this freedom of speech was short-lived. On the third day, special orders were issued to the whole of the press forbidding all mention of Rasputin. Public opinion, however, found expression by other means. The streets of St. Petersburg wore a holiday air. Men stopped each other and, whether acquainted or not, congratulated each other on what had happened. It was no uncommon sight to see people going down on their knees and crossing themselves as they passed the palace of the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovitch, or our house on the Moika. Thanksgiving services were held in churches throughout the town. In all the theaters, the public demanded the national anthem and encored it with enthusiasm. Our health was drunk in private houses, at officers' messes, and in the restaurants. Workmen gave 3 cheers for us at the factories. We received numerous letters of congratulation, couched in the most touching terms. People wrote to us from every quarter, from the front, from various towns and villages, from factories, and from public institutions. Partisans of Rasputin also wrote to us, swearing to avenge the death of the Starets and to kill us. The Grand Duchess Marie Pavlovna, sister of the Grand Duke Dmitri, in giving us her impressions of Tsakov, which was the headquarters of the Northern Front, told us that the death of Rasputin had raised the morale of the army and had inspired the belief that the emperor would now dismiss the Rasputin coterie surrounding him and gather round him honest and faithful people in their stead. One word from the emperor, his summons to a new life, even if it entailed fresh sacrifices for the sake of the country, and everything would have been forgotten and forgiven. One day, M. Trepov, president of the Council of Ministers, sent for me. I had great hopes of this meeting, but I was to be disillusioned. I was driven under escort to the Ministry of the Interior. M. Trepov had sent me for me by order of the emperor, who desired at all costs to discover who had killed Rasputin. He greeted me very kindly, reminded me of his intimacy with my parents, and asked me to look upon him not as an official, but as an old friend of the family. You have probably sent for me by order of the emperor, I asked. He nodded in assent. And it follows that anything I may tell you will be repeated to him. Why, certainly. I cannot lie to my sovereign. Then you surely do not imagine, after what you have told me, that I would confess to the murder of Rasputin, supposing that I had killed him, or that I would give away those who were guilty of it if I knew them. Tell His Majesty that those who destroyed Rasputin did so with the sole purpose of saving the Tsar and their country from inevitable ruin. But, I continued, is valuable time to be lost in tracking down Rasputin's murderer? Consider for a moment the significance which all Russia attaches to the destruction of this criminal, the enthusiasm which has everywhere been evoked. The Rasputin government clique has been thrown into complete confusion. And the emperor, I am convinced that in his inmost soul he also rejoices over what has happened and is waiting for help from you all. Get together and act while there is yet time. Surely some of you realize that we are on the brink of a terrible catastrophe, and that if the emperor is not forcibly extricated from this magic circle in which he is confined, then he himself, all the imperial family, and all the rest of us will be swept away by the wave of revolution. Disaster is inevitable, unless it is to be averted by a sweeping change of policy from above. The minister listened to me with astonishment and attention. He was evidently unaccustomed to such plain speaking. Tell me, Prince, he said suddenly, how did you acquire such self-control and presence of mind? I made no reply, and he said nothing more. My conversation with the president of the Council of Ministers was the last appeal which we made to high government officials. Chapter 21, Banishment. Our fate was as yet undecided. At Tsarskoye Selo, there were endless conferences to determine what treatment should be meted out to us. On December 21st, my father-in-law, the Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich, arrived in St. Petersburg. On learning of the danger which threatened us, he had traveled from Kiev, his headquarters as commander-in-chief of the Russian Air Service. He came straight to the Grand Duke Dmitri's palace and then went on to Tsarskoye Selo. The result of his interview with the emperor was that later in the day, General Maximovich arrived at the Sergei Palace with the emperor's orders that the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich should immediately leave St. Petersburg for Persia, where he was to report to General Baratov, commander-in-chief of the Persian division. His late tutor, General Laming, and Count Kutaisov, ADC to the emperor, were to accompany him. At 11 p.m., the prefect of police came to announce that the Grand Duke's Dmitri train would leave at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was also ordered to leave St. Petersburg. My place of confinement was to be our estate, Rakitno, in the province of Kursk. My train was to leave at midnight. I was placed under the surveillance of Captain Zenchikov, an officer instructor of His Majesty's Corps de Page, and we were accompanied to Rakitno by Ignatiev, the assistant director of the secret police. Both Captain Zenchikov and Ignatiev had received strict instructions from Protopopov himself to keep me in complete isolation. The Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich and I were very loath to part. Those few days which we had passed together under arrest at his palace seemed like so many years. We had lived through and thought over so much. We had begun by entertaining so many hopes for changes which would benefit Russia, and we had ended by burying so many of them. And now fate was forcing us apart. We did not know when we would meet again or in what circumstances. The outlook was gloomy. We were oppressed with evil forebodings. At 11:30 p.m., the Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich came for me and drove me to the station. The public was not admitted to the platform. The station was guarded by a strong force of police. As he took leave of me, the Grand Duke said that he himself was leaving St. Petersburg in the morning and his train would overtake me. With a heavy heart, I entered the carriage. The third bell rang, the engine whistled shrilly, the platform drifted by and then disappeared. Soon afterwards, St. Petersburg vanished into that winter night. The train hurried on its lonely way through the snow-covered fields, sleeping in the darkness. And I, too, was alone, save for the thoughts which crowded my brain and the monotonous sound of the wheels as they carried me on. Conclusion. And then began the breakup of Russia. First, the emperor's abdication, then the agony of the provisional government doomed from the day of its birth. Finally, with the roar of guns and the rattle of rifles bombarding both capitals, came the Bolsheviks and the terrible, bloodthirsty power of the Third International, threatening the peace of the whole world. Through how many horrors our country has lived, how many millions of lives have been lost, how many memorials of our culture have been destroyed. An emigration unexampled in history followed. Masses of people, equivalent to the population of a whole state, left their country and are scattered in exile all over the world. This wandering of homeless Russians has continued for years, and no one of us knows when the hour of return will come. Shall we live to see it, or will it be only for our children that the glorious morn of Russia's delivery will dawn? Exiles always live on hopes of the future and on memories of the past, more perhaps on the past, for the future no one can see. Each of us cherishes visions of the past, memories of dear ones long since dead, memories of a mode of life that is over, visions of our country so beautiful, so mighty, and so vast, from its icebound northern shores to the radiant south. Memory unfolds to us scene after scene and fills us with yearning for all it depicts. Russia's vast plains, her towns and cities, crowned by the church domes shining with gold, the eastern contours of ancient chapels and battlements, the peace and spaciousness of life in the past. Mighty Russia has sunk into an abyss. She was mighty not only by virtue of her territories and her military resources, but in the part which she played in politics and history and in the advancement of civilization. Foreigners, for the most part, did not know her. The familiar stories of a barbarous country ruled by despotic czars with the aid of knout and whip are nothing more than crude inventions, often fabricated by those political exiles mostly of alien origin, from whose mists came Trotsky, Lenin, and Zinoviev. The Western world unhappily gave credence to these stories and did not see the real Russia or know her history. It had forgotten that for centuries Russia had been Europe's bulwark against the Mongolian hordes, that she had borne the whole weight of the Tartar yoke, and that she had finally cast it from her, and under the leadership of the great Muscovite Tsars had been formed into a united and powerful state. The Western world had forgotten Peter the Great and Catherine and their successors, whose chief aim was the enlightenment and cultural development of the country. Under the patronage of the Tsars, universities and high schools were founded. Science flourished, and art, literature, and music attained a level which even now is the admiration of the old world and the new. There are probably few foreigners today who are aware that the daughter of Peter the Great, the Empress Elizabeth, founder of Russia's first university, abolished the death penalty, and that since her time it was never inflicted except by military courts on political criminals who threatened the safety of the realm. It pleased fate that after 300 years of great creative work, a tragic end should overtake that Russian dynasty which the poet Pushkin, in his drama Boris Godunov, describes as the Romanovs, the hope of our native land. Rasputinism, like some leprous disease, held the last reign in its clutches. It struck down Imperial Russia, together with her last Tsar, whose memory is cherished today by every one of us with the deepest pain and sorrow. If victors are not judged, no mercy in the majority of cases is shown to the vanquished. And the Tsar, who witnessed the downfall of Russia, and who, with all his family, met with such a terrible end, is not he one of the vanquished in the eyes of the world? He wielded a power which was greater than himself, and he was crushed beneath it when it collapsed on its century-old foundations. The emperor's reign might have been one of the most glorious in our history if Russia had not been struck down by revolution almost on the eve of victory, in a war which had entailed countless sacrifices and had demanded the most heroic exertions. If Russia had conducted the war to a successful end, she might have become the most powerful state in the world. Her emperor might have become the supreme arbiter of Europe, like his predecessor Alexander I, after his triumphal entry into Paris in 1815. But the Russian Empire collapsed when almost on the threshold of victory, and the Russian emperor perished at the hands of base criminals. In the minds of most people, the terrible end of his reign has overshadowed all that he achieved and all that he had set out to accomplish, not for Russia alone. The noble aim of universal peace belongs to the Russian Tsar. The son of an emperor peacemaker, he cherished the same ideal. He endeavored to serve humanity by calling the Hague Conference to realize his dream. It was not through any fault of his that civilization was not henceforth delivered from the horrors of war. Today, the League of Nations, seconded by the efforts of particular statesmen, spare no pains in averting war. But few people now remember that the first person who conceived this idea on broad, universal lines, devoid of any self-seeking, was the crowned head of the greatest empire in the world. The reign of Nicholas II saw the completion of the great reforms inaugurated by his grandfather, the Tsar Liberator Alexander II. Representative institutions were formed, religious freedom was granted, the peasants were given full ownership of their land, and were freed from that last survival of serfdom, corporal punishment. The prohibition of the sale of spirituous liquors in Russia was the direct result of the emperor's own initiative. Apart from its beneficial effect on their physique and morals, this measure soon opened out new vistas of prosperity for the Russian peasants. The People's Savings Bank overflowed with deposits. Indeed, the peasants grew so rich they needed money so little that during the war they were unwilling to market their surplus produce. And in consequence of this, there was a shortage in certain food commodities just before the revolution. During the reign of Nicholas II, a project of universal education and a bill for the establishment of district councils were submitted to the legislative chambers. Yet everything failed and perished. Fate was against the emperor. In the midst of his dreams of universal peace, he was drawn into the Japanese War, and later into that terrible World War, which, by its death toll, has dwarfed all previous struggles. Victory held out to him the promise of a further expansion of the empire. Constantinople was to come under his sway, and all the Slav races were to be united in an alliance under the powerful protection of Russia. But instead of this, whole provinces were torn away from her. The long-cherished dream of the Russian people that Eastern Christianity should be reinstated in its foremost sanctuary, the Cathedral of St. Sophia in Constantinople, might have been realized in the reign of Emperor Nicholas II. He awaited with impatience the triumphant moment when the cross should be raised above that dome, which for centuries had supported a crescent implanted there by force. But the catastrophe of the revolution resulted in the defilement of the majority of Russia's ancient churches by the diabolical power of the Soviets. The Cathedral of the Holy Virgin of Kostroma, known as Fyodorovskaya at Tsarskoye Selo, which had been built under the direction of the emperor himself, was held by him in special veneration, was turned into a place of amusement for communists. One of the most devout of Russian czars, the emperor had set his heart on the restoration of the patriarchate in Russia. And yet it was in his reign that the Metropolitan Peterim, thanks to Rasputin's criminal intrigues, was appointed to the Holy Synod, an office of which he was thoroughly unworthy. The church's best representatives were passed over, while those who were attainted received advancement. The emperor loved his people and was cut off from them. He was drawn to the pure, unsophisticated soul of the simple Russian peasant, and fate forced upon him in the guise of a peasant, one who was not only a criminal, a wastrel, and a horse thief, but an utter traitor, one who brought the emperor and all Russia to their ruin. The emperor longed for a son and heir whom he might train to succeed him, and to whom he could leave a throne that had been well secured. After long years of waiting, a son was born, an intelligent, capable boy. But from the day of his birth, he was afflicted by an incurable illness which at any moment might cause his death. The father did not pass on his crown. He abdicated for himself and his son. He abdicated on behalf of his son because he would not be parted from him, because he did not wish to see a sick child on a throne already shaken by rebellion. Few monarchs have bestowed such love and care upon their families. Emperor Nicholas II was attached to his wife and children with all his heart and soul. Yet it was the empress who was devoted to her husband, who was ready to sacrifice everything for his well-being, who was the cause of his failures and fatal mistakes. She blindly believed in Rasputin and was completely dominated by his influence. She had implicit faith in the healing powers of those drugs which Badmayev, which, in reality, were administered to the emperor and Tsarevich for purposes quite different from those she supposed. During the whole of his life, the Emperor Nicholas II was dogged by a merciless fate. With his gentle submission to his destiny, could he develop a resolute will which would know neither hesitation nor retreat? It may be that doubt first arose in his mind during the festivities which accompanied his coronation, when the triumphal path of the young emperor, who had repaired to the ancient capital to receive the blessing of the church on his reign, was strewn with the mutilated bodies of the victims of the terrible catastrophe on the Kodnika. The simple-minded Russian people looked upon this catastrophe as an omen of evil to come, and the evil came. All the horrors of his imprisonment, all the insulting behavior of the revolutionary authorities, the emperor bore with unaffected gentleness, with true humility, with the high-mindedness of one who was every inch a Tsar. And with unaffected gentleness, with majesty, he died. In honor of conquering kings, memorials are raised, imposing statues are erected to foster the respect and admiration of their subjects. But in the memory of Emperor Nicholas II and of his tragic end, the Russian people, if the hour of their deliverance sees their moral regeneration, will build a cathedral where they will pray for the soul of the martyred Tsar and seek forgiveness for the grievous sins and monstrous crimes committed in the name of revolution. So that's the end of the book. Here's the appendices. There's just a few more of these appendices. I'll read them. Appendix. The emperor's natural kindness, his greatness of soul, his profound and unselfish love for Russia were manifested not only in the hour of his martyrdom, but in the manner and motives of his abdication. His last manifesto, together with his farewell order to the army, are documents of human interest apart from their historical significance. Whatever mistakes the emperor may have committed while under the influence of his fateful delusions, the welfare of his country was his constant and unchanging care. It must in justice be acknowledged that most of the Russian czars who are described in Europe as Eastern despots were inspired with a high sense of duty towards their subjects. An interesting comparison may be drawn between the maxims of two monarchs, each of whom history has styled great. L'état, c'est moi, said Louis XIV of France. I am the state. Peter I of Russia addressed his subjects thus: Ye are to know then that Peter setteth no value on his own life, if Russia should yet live. The Emperor Nicholas II was ever faithful to this precept of his great ancestor. In his abdication, as in his subsequent refusal to save his own life, Russia was his only thought. I append the Emperor's manifesto and his farewell order to the army in order to recall their contents to remembrance. Manifesto announcing the abdication of the Emperor Nicholas II. At this time of intense struggle against an external enemy who for nearly 3 years has been striving to enslave our country, it has pleased the Lord God to send down on Russia a fresh and grievous trial. The disturbances which have begun in our midst threaten to have a disastrous effect on the further progress of this stubbornly fought war. The destiny of Russia, the honor of our heroic army, the welfare of the people, and the whole future of our beloved fatherland demand that the war shall be conducted at all cost to a victorious end. A cruel foe is exerting his last strength, and the hour is at hand when our valiant army, with the help of our glorious allies, will finally overthrow him. In these decisive days in the life of Russia, we have deemed it our duty to facilitate the close union of our people and the rallying of all their forces for the swift attainment of victory. And in agreement with the Imperial Duma, we have decided to renounce the throne of Russia and to divest ourselves of the supreme power. Not wishing to part from our beloved son, we bequeath the heritage to our brother, the Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich. Blessing him on his accession to the throne of the Russian Empire, we adjure our brother to rule in full and unbroken harmony with the people's representatives in the legislative assemblies on principles with which they shall determine, and to take an inviolable oath that he will do so. In the name of our dearly beloved country, we call upon all faithful sons of the fatherland to fulfill their sacred duty to it by obeying the Tsar in this time of grave national crisis, and to help him, together with the representatives of the people, to lead Russia into the path of victory, prosperity, and glory. May the Lord God help Russia. Nicholas. Appendix, the last message of the Emperor Nicholas II to the troops, issued by the Chief of Staff of the Commander-in-Chief, 8th of March, 1917. After his abdication and before his departure from the zone of the army in the field, the Emperor Nicholas II bade farewell to the troops in the following words, quote, I address you for the last time, my well-beloved troops. Now that I have renounced the throne of Russia on my own behalf and that of my son, the supreme power is passed to the provisional government established on the initiative of the Imperial Duma. May God aid it to lead Russia along the path of glory and prosperity, and may God aid you, valiant troops, to defend our country against the evil enemy. For 2.5 years, you have hourly endured the hardships of military service. Much blood has been shed, great efforts have been made, and the day is already at hand when Russia, united with her brave allies by the desire for victory, will break down the enemy's last resistance. This unprecedented war must be fought out to a completely victorious finish. Whoever thinks of peace at this moment, whoever desires peace, is a traitor to his country. I know that this is the feeling of every honest soldier. Do your duty. Defend our great country valorously. Comply with the orders of the provisional government. Obey your officers, and remember that any slackening of discipline is merely a service rendered to the enemy. I firmly believe that unbounded love for our great country abides in your hearts. May the Lord God bless you, and may St. George, the great martyr, lead you to victory. Nicholas, 8th of March, 1917. And there you have it. That's the end. So that'll be the sixth part. That is the sixth part of the book, Rasputin, His Malignant Influence and Assassination by Felix Yusupov. And I'll try to read some other ones. There's some other good ones. The battles between the whites and the reds, things like that, maybe something like that. There's other kind of odd things about Rasputin and his relationship with the family and other things that I'll also kind of look into. But I have a couple books in mind. I mean, I can tell you right now, I'm looking at one that is about the Reds, and it's called, let's see, it's not the Malignant one. One is The Eclipse of Russia, and The Memoirs of General Wrangel is another one, which was recommended as a kind of tale of the white. It's the last commander-in-chief of the Russian National Army. It was translated, but it covers kind of the revolution, the counter-revolution, the marches, and the final victory of the Reds. Well, you know, what's known as the war between the White Army and the Red Army. But I think they're very telling. There's a lot of important facts and everything like that. But I think it's another angle of Rasputin and kind of what led up to the end, his end and the end of the Romanov dynasty, I think is an important line of inquiry. So thanks a lot for listening. You can find a lot of my stuff on Patreon. I'm pretty active on Patreon. It's a legacy site. Started 10 years ago, but I've really been posting on there. I'm pretty responsive. I also post PDFs and some stuff that I won't post on social media. I post there as well. But it's a great place to contact me because I get notifications right away. Also, emails is the other way to contact me. William Ramsey Investigates, Proton Mail, or gmail.com. And I'm pretty active on X. I don't know if I've been shadow banned, but I certainly haven't been censored on X to my knowledge, but I'm definitely off Facebook and Instagram and all those other ones. But thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed this book.